Hello everybody, I'm Matt Williamson. Thank you for joining me here on Pop Goes the 60s. I just want to do a follow-up video on the psychedelic Beatles criteria I talked about a week or so ago. And this is Bogey. Whenever I'm not at my desk, he feels the need to join me here and hog the camera. So we're just going to let him. Hopefully he will behave. I just wanted to do a follow-up to respond to some of the good comments I've gotten. So this idea of creating criteria for psychedelia is not easy, and some people had some questions about some of the criteria, and I wanted to talk about that briefly. And then I also did a survey with my Patreon followers, and we ranked, rated, and scored some of these Beatles songs. So I want to just give you that information, and you can see where they fell through some people that was not me that was grading them. So first of all, this idea of psychedelic music. One of the criteria that people gave me a hard time on, or questioned it, had to do more with the very last criteria, and that was whether or not the composer was under the influence. One of the things that makes this criteria less important, it's only weighted 0 or 1 point. And the reason I added this in the beginning had to do with Bob Dylan's work. And the video I did a couple years ago called What Makes a Song Psychedelic, I go into this at great lengths with regard to the song Visions of Johanna. And there are a lot of people that, it's like, with Dylan or the Beatles, we know so much about them. On a given song, whenever they wrote it, we know what they had for breakfast that day. This is good and bad. In the psychedelic world, we know some of the substances these people were taking while writing, what influenced them, etc. So where Dylan is concerned, there's a lot of, I would say not controversy, but there's a lot of disagreement. Some people say, well, he's not psychedelic at all. Some people say, well, his lyrics are very psychedelic. So in an effort to address that, and like the Beatles, for instance, we know when they were taking psychedelics and where, if you want to call it impaired, however you want to call it, inspired. Where Dylan is concerned, there was a period where he was not only taking heroin, he was smoking marijuana, he was using methamphetamine, and drinking red wine, and copious amounts of coffee as well, all at the same time. So people insisted that this had an effect on his writing. And I can't disagree with that. I mean, that's a lot of drugs. This is another thing that came up, some people questioned, was the idea to separate psychedelics from other drugs. So what is a psychedelic? Well, I guess that would be, mushrooms or LSD or mescaline or DMT, things that are, they're deemed psychedelic for a reason. It's a completely altered state. Now, I would argue that other drugs do the same thing, not that have the same effect necessarily, but different people have different effects. I mean, you can go into psychosis from too much marijuana or too much methamphetamine. So these are all things that are in play. And again, it would be hard to put a criteria on one drug over another because people just take these things in differently. I have no idea, one person to the next, how it would affect them. So anyway, getting back to my criteria, it's only 0 or 1 point, so it's a rather negligible amount. So I just wanted to touch upon that. Let me see here. We lost our little guy here. So let me go over some of the songs that I had given my Patreon supporters. Here's my list here. Yeah, the thing I forgot to mention with regard to other drugs, peyote, we're talking about cannabis, heroin, cocaine. Those drugs were all used by jazz musicians, and that affected not only their playing and their lifestyle, but the composition as well. So psychedelic music really has a longer history than I think people want to, even people realize. And again, when I talk about psychedelic music, it's kind of understood that, especially with people my age and older, that we're talking about that 60s period. So I think that the genre of psychedelic music, I think, really began there as a genre. It doesn't mean people weren't getting loaded and writing music, because they were for a long time, and ever since, really. So I have a tendency to pay attention to the genre as a genre and why it was considered a genre. It usually is connected to a time period, much like prog. I don't want to get into prog in this video, but very similarly, I think. Okay, let's look at some of the results I got from my Patreon subscribers. We did 10 Beatles songs, and I had people rank them or rate them based on the criteria. I chose 10 Beatles songs, a few of them different from what I had in my initial video. And one of the things that you get from being a member of my Patreon subscribers is that you get to do additional surveys. There are different things that I offer, like giveaways, and we do raffles, additional videos, additional downloads. So partaking in surveys like this is one of those things. And I did something very small here just to test it. And it was interesting. I thought, well, you know, might as well give you the results since we talked about it. Okay, song number 1, The Inner Light. That's a George Harrison song. So out of I had about 20 some people for each of these songs. So the scale really goes from 0 to 17 being most psychedelic, according to the criteria I laid out in my last video. So Inner Light out of 17 scored at 12.6. Rain, that rated 11.5 out of 17. Fool on the Hill, that was 7.9 out of 17. Blue Jay Way, 12.3 out of 17. Now some of these, I mean, scored rather high because most of these songs are thought to have some psychedelic feeling to them or whatever. So I wasn't picking She Loves You in this for obvious reasons. We have I Am the Walrus. That's a pretty high one. That's 15.8 out of 17. Penny Lane, 9.7 out of 17. Fixin' a Hole, 12.1 out of 17. Now this was interesting because we had one person rate Fixin' a Hole 17 out of 17. So when I did my scoring, and the only 17 out of 17 I had personally was Tomorrow Never Knows. And Tomorrow Never Knows, so I guess, is Fixing a Hole as psychedelic as Tomorrow Never Knows? I would say that this score is a little bit high. My grading on these songs tend to be more conservative against some of the people that took this, against most of the people that took this on my Patreon subscription. So yeah, my scores are a little bit lower. Strawberry Fields Forever ended up at 14.9. It's All Too Much, 13.6. And finally, the song Because from Abbey Road, 9.25. So that's kind of interesting. Let me put these up here on the screen for you, so you can see where they all ranked. I may continue this and do another set of 10 songs if this is interesting to people. Like I say, it's really fun to do these and kind of rank them in a way that maybe people hadn't thought. It gives us an idea of where they fall based on criteria, which, as you well know, I'm a big proponent of. So anyway, that is my little quick review of the data I've taken from my Patreon supporters. If you want to join, I'll leave a link below, and I'll have plenty of other Beatle stuff coming up here on Pop Goes the 60s. Thanks for watching.